One rainy night, a tired waitress made a simple choice: to help a lost little boy no one else wanted to deal with. But within minutes, she was judged, questioned, and pushed aside like she didn't belong. What no one in that diner knew was that the child sitting in front of her wasn't just any boy. And by the next day, the man who came looking for him would turn everything upside down. On a cold Chicago night, inside a small diner glowing under flickering neon lights, Jasmine Carter thought she was just doing the right thing. A hungry child, a warm meal, a little kindness. But sometimes, the smallest act can uncover the biggest truth and change a life forever. Rain tapped steadily against the glass like it had all night, soft at first, then harder, as if the sky itself was growing impatient. Outside, the streetlights flickered over puddles that reflected broken neon signs. Open, burger, cough. Half the letters burned out, just like everything else in this part of Chicago. Inside the diner, the air was warm but tired. The smell of grease and coffee clung to the walls. A couple sat in the far booth, speaking in low voices. A truck driver leaned over the counter, scrolling through his phone. Somewhere in the back, dishes clattered like distant thunder. Jasmine Carter moved between tables with practiced ease, though her feet ached and her shoulders felt heavier than usual. It had been a long shift. 2, actually. Her apron was clean, but her eyes carried the kind of fatigue that didn't wash off. "Refill?" she asked of the truck driver, her voice calm, polite. He didn't look up at first. When he did, his gaze lingered a second too long. Not curious, not kind, just measuring. "Yeah," he muttered. Jasmine nodded, poured the coffee, and stepped away. She was used to that look. She'd been seeing it her whole life. The bell above the diner door gave a soft, hollow ring. No one paid attention at first, not until the wind followed. A cold draft slipped into the room, carrying rain and something else. Something out of place. Jasmine turned. A small boy stood just inside the doorway. He couldn't have been older than 6. His jacket was too light for the weather, damp at the shoulders. His sneakers were clean, too clean for this neighborhood, but soaked through. Dark curls clung to his forehead. In his hand he held a phone, but the screen was black. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood there, looking around like the world had suddenly become unfamiliar. The diner fell quieter, not silent, but different. Conversations slowed. The truck driver glanced over. The couple in the booth leaned subtly toward each other. And then the eyes came. Not on the boy, on Jasmine. She felt it before she saw it. The shift in the room, the weight of attention landing squarely on her shoulders. Like she had somehow caused this. Like this moment belonged to her. Rick appeared from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a towel. His eyes flicked from the boy to Jasmine, and something tightened in his expression. "Don't," he said under his breath as he passed her. "Don't get involved." Jasmine didn't answer. Her gaze stayed on the boy. He hadn't moved. Rain dripped from his jacket onto the tile floor in small, steady drops. But no one else stood up. No one else asked a question. Jasmine took a step forward, then another. "Hey there," she said gently, keeping her voice low, careful not to startle him. "You okay?" The boy looked at her, really looked. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. It wasn't fear she saw. It was something deeper, something she recognized. Loneliness. His voice barely came out. "I think I'm lost." A pause settled over the diner. Not loud, but heavy. Jasmine nodded slowly, crouching down so she was closer to his height. "That's okay," she said. "We'll figure it out." Behind her, a chair scraped. Someone whispered. Another voice, sharper this time. "You should call the police." Jasmine ignored it. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan." "That's a good name," she said with a small smile. "I'm Jasmine." He hesitated, then nodded. His fingers tightened around the dead phone. "Do you know your dad's number?" she asked. He shook his head. The rain outside picked up, tapping harder now, louder against the glass. Rick stepped closer, his voice tight. "Jasmine." She didn't turn. "He shouldn't be here," Rick said. Look, this isn't our problem." Jasmine stood up slowly, her eyes still on Ethan. "It is now," she said quietly. Rick exhaled sharply. "You don't know that. You don't know anything about this situation." Jasmine did know one thing. She knew what it felt like to stand somewhere you didn't belong. To be small. To be ignored. To wait for someone, anyone, to decide you were worth helping. She remembered the cold bench at a bus station years ago, the sound of people walking past, and the way no one stopped, not until it was almost too late. She looked back at Ethan. He hadn't moved, still standing there, still waiting. "I've got you," she said softly. Behind her, the whispers grew louder. Someone lifted their phone. Another voice said, "This doesn't look right." Jasmine felt the room closing in, not physically, but in that quiet, invisible way people can push you out without ever touching you. Still, she stepped forward and held the door open a little wider, not for the rain this time, but for something else, for a choice, for a moment that could still go either way. Ethan took a small step inside, just one. But it changed everything. Because now, the question wasn't whether he belonged there. The question was, why had he come here at all? And why did it feel like no one else wanted him to stay? The rain kept falling. And somewhere beyond the diner windows, something was already in motion. Something bigger than any of them realized. Something that would arrive by morning. But for now, it was just the rain. And the room. Jasmine could feel it pressing in on her. Not physically. No one moved closer. But in the way people leaned back just slightly, as if distance could protect them from whatever story they thought was unfolding. The diner had changed. Same flickering lights. Same hum of the refrigerator in the back. But the warmth was gone. Now it felt like a courtroom. And Jasmine was already on trial. Rick stepped beside her again, his voice tighter this time, less of a warning and more of a command. "Jasmine, I'm serious. Don't make this your problem." She didn't look at him. Ethan stood there, small and uncertain, with water still dripping onto the floor beneath him. His eyes moved from face to face, searching, not for authority, not for answers, but for safety. And not finding it. Except maybe in her. "I said I got it," Jasmine replied quietly. Rick let out a breath through his nose. "You don't know what it is." That part was true. She didn't know who the boy belonged to. She didn't know how he got here. She didn't know what kind of trouble might follow. But she did know what it felt like when no one stepped forward. And she wasn't about to be one of the people who looked away. A woman in a sharp coat at the corner booth leaned toward her companion, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "This is exactly how things go wrong. You try to help, and then suddenly you're involved in something you can't control." Her companion nodded. Or worse. Jasmine heard it. Of course she did. People like her always heard everything. She straightened slightly, smoothing the front of her apron. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight, like something was slowly wrapping around her ribs. "Come on," she said gently to Ethan. "Let's get you warmed up." He hesitated. just for a second. Then he followed. That was all it took. One step. And the room shifted again. Rick rubbed his forehead. Unbelievable. Jasmine led Ethan to a booth near the window, away from the center of attention, but not far enough to escape it completely. She grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and handed it to him. Here, she said. Dry your hands. He took it carefully, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. Thank you, he whispered. The words were small, but they landed heavy. Jasmine offered a soft smile. You're okay. But she wasn't sure he was. And she definitely wasn't sure she was anymore either. She grabbed a menu, though she already knew what she'd give him. Something warm. Something simple. Something that felt like care. Behind her, she could hear the low hum of voices growing again. A man near the counter muttered, "Somebody should call this in." Another voice answered, "Yeah, before it turns into something." Something. That word again. Jasmine turned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of them. Not one person stood up. Not one person asked the boy a direct question. But everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. And somehow, every version of that story seemed to circle back to her. She exhaled slowly and headed toward the kitchen window. "Us grilled cheese, Vin," she said to the cook, "and a cup of tomato soup." The cook raised an eyebrow. "On the house?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Yeah." Rick stepped in immediately. "No, not yeah. We don't give out free meals every time someone walks in off the street." Jasmine met his eyes. "He's 6, she said. Rick crossed his arms. "And?" The word hung there longer than it should have. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. She just reached into her apron, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and set them on the counter. "Then it's not free," she said. Rick stared at the money, then at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not softer, not kinder, just more complicated. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back. The cook shrugged and got to work. Jasmine returned to the booth. Ethan was sitting with his hands folded, the towel beside him now, his eyes fixed on the door again. "You expecting someone?" she asked gently. He nodded. "My dad." There it was, a small answer, but it changed everything. "What's his name?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then shook his head slightly. I know he's coming." Jasmine studied him for a moment. Kids didn't usually speak like that, unless they believed it. Really believed it. "Okay," she said softly. "Then we'll wait." Behind her, a phone camera clicked, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the room. She turned. A young man stood near the counter, holding his phone up, not hiding it, not apologizing, recording. Jasmine's stomach tightened. "Hey," she said calmly. "Can you not do that?" He shrugged. "Just making sure everything's documented." "Documented," she repeated. "In case something happens." Something, always something. Jasmine held his gaze for a second longer, then turned back to Ethan. Because arguing wouldn't change anything. Because defending herself never seemed to matter in moments like this. Because right now, the only thing that mattered was the boy sitting across from her. The grilled cheese arrived, steam rising from the plate. Ethan stared at it like it might disappear. "Go ahead," Jasmine said. He picked it up carefully, took a bite. And for the first time since he walked in, he relaxed. Just a little. But it was enough. Enough to remind Jasmine why she'd made her choice. Even if the room hadn't. Even if the room never would. She sat back slightly, watching him eat, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of every eye still lingering in the background. And somewhere beneath all of that, a quiet question began to form. Not from the others, not from Rick, but from inside her. Had she just done the right thing? Or had she just stepped into something that was about to change everything? Jasmine didn't have the answer. All she had was the quiet sound of Ethan chewing, slow and careful, like he was trying not to take up too much space. The rain kept tapping against the windows, steady and cold. Outside, headlights slid past like distant ghosts. Inside, the diner felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls had leaned in just enough to listen. Ethan took another bite of the grilled cheese, his hands still a little shaky. A drop of soup slipped off the spoon and onto the table. He froze for a second, glancing up at Jasmine like he expected to be corrected, and she reached for a napkin and wiped it gently. "It's okay," she said. "Happens all the time." He nodded, but his shoulders stayed tense. Jasmine leaned back slightly, giving him space. "You hungry?" He nodded again, quicker this time. "Yeah," he said softly. She smiled just a little. "Good. Then you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do." Across the diner, someone cleared their throat loudly. Not subtle, not kind. Just loud enough to remind everyone that this moment wasn't private. Jasmine didn't turn, but she felt it. The eyes, still watching, still waiting. A chair scraped against the floor near the counter. The man with the phone shifted position, angling for a better shot. His voice was low, but not low enough. "This is getting weird," he muttered into the camera. "Kid shows up out of nowhere. And she just takes him in?" Jasmine's jaw tightened. She didn't look up. Didn't give him what he wanted. Because this wasn't about him. It wasn't about any of them. "Is it good?" she asked Ethan, nodding toward the sandwich. He took another bite before answering. "Yeah," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "It's really good." "Best in the city," she said lightly. That earned the smallest hint of a smile. For a second, just a second, the room softened. Then Rick's voice cut through it. "Jasmine." She didn't respond right away. He stepped closer, his tone sharper now. "We need to talk." "I'm working," she said. "No," he said. "You're not. Not right now." That got her attention. She looked up. Rick glanced toward Ethan, then back at her. "Back. Now." Jasmine hesitated, just for a second. Then she stood. "Oh, I'll be right back," she told Ethan. He looked up at her, uncertainty flickering across his face again. "You're not leaving, right?" The question hit harder than it should have. "No," she said steady. "I'm right here." He nodded slowly. She walked toward the back, each step heavier than the last. Rick pushed open the kitchen door, and the noise from the diner faded behind them, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the low hiss of the grill. He turned to her immediately. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Helping a kid," she said. "You're involving this place in something we don't understand." "He's 6, Rick." "And you don't know where he came from," Rick shot back. "You don't know who's looking for him. You don't know what kind of situation this is." Jasmine crossed her arms, not defensive, just steady. "I know he walked in here alone," she said. "I know he's cold. I know he's hungry." Rick shook his head. "That's not enough." "It is for me." Rick let out a frustrated breath. "You're not thinking this through." Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. "No," she said quietly. "I am." There was a pause, a long one. Rick looked at her like he was trying to figure something out. Not about the situation, but about her. "You always do this," he muttered. "Do what?" "Step into things that don't belong to you." Jasmine's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A memory, a station bench, a cold night, people walking past. She swallowed it down. Maybe that's the problem, she said. Maybe too many people think it's not their place. Rick stared at her for a moment. Neither of them spoke. Then, "Oh, from the front," a voice, louder this time. "You need to call this in." Jasmine turned her head slightly. Rick didn't move. Another voice followed. "This doesn't look right at all." Jasmine's chest tightened. Rick exhaled slowly. "You hear that?" She did. Every word, every assumption, every quiet accusation wrapped in concern. Rick stepped closer. "If something goes wrong, it comes back on this place. On me." Jasmine looked at him, and for the first time she saw something different. Not just control. Fear. "I'm not asking you to take responsibility," she said. "I already did." Rick shook his head. "That's not how it works." "It is tonight." Another pause. Then Rick reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. Jasmine's stomach dropped. "Rick," she said. He didn't look at her. "I'm calling it in," he said. No, she stepped forward. "Don't do that." He raised a hand slightly, not aggressive, just firm. "I'm not risking this." Jasmine's voice stayed low, but there was steel in it now. "You're not helping. I'm protecting this place." "And what about him?" she asked. Rick didn't answer. He already knew. He just wasn't willing to say it. Jasmine stood there for a moment, the hum of the kitchen filling the silence between them. Then she turned, walked back toward the front, toward Ethan, toward the eyes, toward the tension that hadn't gone anywhere. When she stepped back into the diner, it felt different again. Quieter, but not calmer. Ethan looked up the second he saw her. Relief washed over his face. "You came back," he said. Jasmine nodded, sliding back into the booth across from him. "Oh, I told you I would." He held her gaze for a second longer than before, like he needed to be sure. Then he took another bite. The man with the phone was still recording. The couple in the booth had stopped talking entirely. The truck driver leaned back, watching, waiting. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. And Jasmine could feel it now. Whatever this was, it wasn't staying small. It wasn't staying simple. Because somewhere out there, beyond the rain and the neon lights, someone was already looking for that boy. And when they found him, nothing in this diner would be the same again. Jasmine felt it before it happened. That shift in the air, the kind that doesn't make a sound, but changes everything. Ethan had just taken another bite, slower now, calmer, when the bell above the door rang again. But this time, no wind followed, no rain, just presence. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, water still dripping from their shoulders, their radios crackling faintly against the quiet hum of the diner. Every head turned, not toward Ethan, toward Jasmine, always toward Jasmine. Rick stood near the counter, arms folded tight across his chest, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "There they are," he said under his breath. Jasmine didn't move, didn't stand, didn't explain. She just stayed seated across from Ethan, her hands resting calmly on the table, even though her heartbeat had started to climb. Ethan looked up, then back at her. "Who are they?" he asked quietly. Jasmine gave him a small, steady look. "Just people who want to help." She hoped that was still true. The officers approached slowly, with measured steps, not rushed, but not casual either. One of them, a taller man with a lined face, spoke first. We got a call about a situation involving a child. His voice was neutral, but his eyes had already made a decision. And they weren't on the child. They were on Jasmine. Rick stepped forward quickly, eager now. Yeah. He walked in alone. And he gestured toward Jasmine, just sat him down like everything was normal. The officer nodded once, then turned fully toward Jasmine. Ma'am, he said, can you stand up for me? The request was simple, polite even, but it didn't feel like a request. Jasmine didn't rush. She stood slowly, keeping her movements calm, deliberate. I'm just helping him, she said. The second officer, younger, glanced at Ethan briefly, but only briefly, before returning his attention to Jasmine. Can you tell us what's going on here? Jasmine opened her mouth, but before she could speak, she's the one who took him in. The voice came from behind, sharp, confident, the man with the phone, still recording. Jasmine felt something twist inside her. Not fear, not exactly. Something heavier, something familiar. Being spoken about instead of spoken to. I didn't take him, she said, her voice steady. He walked in alone. The taller officer tilted his head slightly. And you didn't think to call this in? I was making sure he was okay. And you didn't think that maybe that wasn't your place? There it was. Not loud, not aggressive, but clear. Jasmine held his gaze. My place, she said slowly, was right where he needed someone. A flicker passed through the officer's expression. Not agreement. Not yet. But something close to hesitation. Rick stepped in again, filling the silence. I told her not to get involved, he said. She didn't listen. Jasmine didn't look at him. Didn't need to. She already knew what side he had chosen. The younger officer stepped closer to Ethan now. Hey, buddy, he said, crouching slightly. What's your name? Ethan looked at Jasmine first. Always Jasmine, then back at the officer. Ethan. Okay, Ethan. Do you know where your parents are? A pause. Ethan swallowed. My dad's coming. The officer nodded, but his eyes flicked up, back to Jasmine. Did he tell you that? He asked her. Jasmine shook her head. He told me. The taller officer crossed his arms. Ma'am, we're going to need to sort this out. For now, I'm going to ask you to step aside. Jasmine felt the shift again. Not just in the room, inside herself. Step aside. After everything. After choosing to help when no one else would. After sitting with him, feeding him, staying when everyone else kept their distance. Now she was the one being moved. Set aside. Like she didn't belong in the story anymore. Ethan's hand reached out instinctively. He grabbed the edge of her sleeve. She's with me, he said quickly. The room went still. The officers paused. Jasmine looked down at him. His fingers were small, but they held tight. She helped me, he added, his voice trembling now. Don't take her away. Something cracked in the silence. Not loud, but deep. The younger officer hesitated. The older one didn't. So, ma'am, he said again, firmer this time. Step over here. Jasmine slowly pulled her sleeve free, not from rejection, but gently, so Ethan wouldn't feel it as loss. I'm right here, she whispered to him. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if that was still true. She stepped away from the booth. Every eye followed her, not with concern, with confirmation, as if the room had already decided how this would end. The man with the phone adjusted his angle, capturing everything. Rick stood back, arms still crossed, but his jaw tight now. Even he looked unsure. Jasmine moved a few steps to the side, close enough to still see Ethan. far enough to be separated. The officer turned slightly, lowering his voice, but not enough. We need to figure out if there's anything we're missing here. The other officer nodded. And if there is? A pause, then. We handle it. Jasmine stood there, still, quiet. But inside, everything was loud, because for the first time since Ethan walked in, she wasn't the one protecting him anymore, and she wasn't sure anyone else would. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, unchanging. But inside the diner, the balance had shifted, and whatever came next was no longer in her control. Jasmine stood near the edge of the diner, close enough to see Ethan, but no longer close enough to reach him. That distance, just a few steps, felt wider than the street outside. The taller officer shifted his stance, turning slightly so his body blocked Jasmine from the booth. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even intentional, but it said everything. Ethan looked smaller now, not because he had changed, but because she had been moved away. All right, Ethan, the younger officer said, trying to soften his voice. Let's figure this out, okay? Where did you come from tonight? Ethan's eyes flickered toward Jasmine again, always back to her, like she was the only fixed point in a room that kept changing. I got out of the car, he said. The officers exchanged a glance. What car? The taller one asked. Ethan hesitated. I don't know. The man with the phone stepped forward slightly, voice cutting through the moment. See? That's what I'm saying. Something's off. Jasmine's hands tightened at her sides. He's scared, she said, unable to stay silent. That's what's off. The taller officer didn't look at her. Ma'am, we need you to stay where you are. Her jaw clenched. Stay where you are. Not like she had crossed a line she didn't know existed. Rick leaned against the counter, watching now with less certainty than before. His confidence had faded into something quieter, something closer to discomfort. But he didn't step in, didn't say anything to correct what was happening. He had already made his call. The younger officer crouched slightly lower to Ethan's level. Hey, buddy. You said your dad's coming, right? Ethan nodded. Do you know his number or where he might be? Another shake of the head. He just said to wait. The officer's expression shifted, just slightly. Wait where? Ethan looked around. The diner, the neon lights, the rain on the glass. Here. A silence followed, heavy, uncertain. The taller officer straightened. All right, we're going to need to verify some things. He turned then, finally, toward Jasmine. Ma'am, can you come with us for a moment? The words were calm, but they carried weight. Jasmine felt it settle in her chest. I didn't do anything wrong, she said. We didn't say you did. Then why do I need to come with you? Another pause. Not long. Just long enough. Procedure. That word. Always that word. Jasmine nodded slowly. Because arguing wouldn't change anything. Because explaining rarely did. She stepped forward. Each step careful, measured, like the ground beneath her might shift if she moved too fast. Ethan's chair scraped suddenly against the floor. No! The word came out louder than anything else he had said. He stood up, small but firm. She didn't do anything, he said again, louder now. She helped me. The room froze. The man with the phone stopped talking. Rick's eyes widened slightly. The younger officer glanced at his partner. Jasmine felt her throat tighten. Ethan, she said softly. It's okay. No, it's not, he said quickly. They think you did something. The simplicity of it cut deeper than anything else. Because he understood. Not everything, but enough. Jasmine took a step closer, stopping just short of crossing the invisible line the officers had created. "I'm right here," she said. Ethan's eyes filled. "You said you wouldn't leave." And there it was. Not an accusation, a fear. The same one she had carried years ago, the same one that never really went away. Jasmine swallowed. "I'm not leaving," she said again, but the words felt thinner now. The taller officer shifted his weight. "Ma'am, we need to move this along." Jasmine looked at him, then at Ethan, then at the room. The eyes, still watching, still judging, still waiting for confirmation that their suspicions had been right all along. She lifted her chin slightly. "I'll cooperate," she said. The word tasted bitter, but she said it anyway. Because sometimes doing the right thing didn't look like strength. Sometimes it looked like standing still while the world misunderstood you. The younger officer placed a gentle hand near Ethan's shoulder. "We're just going to talk to her for a minute, okay?" Ethan didn't respond. He just stared at Jasmine, like he was trying to memorize her face. Jasmine offered him a small smile. Not big, not forced, just enough. Then she turned, walked toward the door. The rain outside hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown heavier. The sound of it filled the space as the door opened. When cold air rushed in, Jasmine stepped out onto the wet pavement. The neon lights reflected beneath her feet, broken into colors that didn't quite hold together. Behind her, the door closed. And just like that, she was outside, separated, not just from Ethan, from the moment, from the story, from the truth she knew but couldn't prove. The officers followed her out. The taller one spoke quietly into his radio. The younger one glanced back through the window. Ethan was still there, standing, waiting. Jasmine wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Because for the first time that night, she wasn't the one protecting him anymore, and she didn't know if anyone else would. Across the street, headlights moved slowly through the rain, unremarkable, just another car passing by, or so it seemed. Because somewhere in the distance, engines were already turning, decisions were already being made, and the truth, the real truth, was closer than anyone inside that diner could see, and it didn't arrive with sirens. It didn't come with shouting or flashing lights. It came quietly, from a small, forgotten screen. Inside the diner, Ethan hadn't moved. He stood beside the booth, eyes fixed on the door where Jasmine had disappeared. The rain blurred the glass, turning the world outside into streaks of gray and neon. He pressed his hand lightly against the window, as if that could somehow keep her close. "She said she wouldn't leave," he whispered. No one answered. Rick shifted his weight behind the counter, his arms no longer crossed, his posture less certain. Was the confidence he had earlier, the certainty that he had done the right thing, was starting to thin. The man with the phone kept recording, but even he had gone quieter now. Something had changed. Not enough to undo what had happened, but enough to make the room uneasy. The younger officer glanced back toward Ethan again, then toward his partner. "She didn't seem like—" he started, then stopped. The taller officer cut him off with a look. "We don't go by seems, we go by what we know." "And what do we know?" the younger one asked. A pause. Longer this time. Ethan slowly walked back to the booth and climbed onto the seat. The grilled cheese sat half-finished in front of him, the soup cooling, untouched now. He looked down at the phone in his hands, still dark, still silent. For a moment, it felt like nothing would happen, and like everything would stay suspended in this uneasy quiet. Then, a flicker, so small it almost went unnoticed. The screen lit up. Ethan blinked, then leaned closer. "Wait," he said. No one reacted at first. But then, the phone buzzed. Once. Sharp. Loud enough to cut through the silence. The man with the phone lowered his own device slightly. Rick looked up. The younger officer turned. Ethan stared at the screen. The name glowed bright against the dim diner light. Dad. The phone vibrated again. And again. A string of missed calls filled the screen. Dozens. Timestamps stacking one after another. Minutes apart. Relentless. Ethan's breath caught. "He's calling," he said. The words landed differently this time. Not like before. Not like a child's hope. Like something real. The younger officer stepped forward. "Oh, let me see that." Ethan hesitated, then held the phone out. The officer took it carefully, scanning the screen. His expression shifted, just slightly. "Sir," he said, turning to his partner, "you should look at this." The taller officer stepped closer, took the phone, looked. His jaw tightened, not in suspicion, but in something else. Recognition. "What?" Rick asked from behind the counter, trying to sound casual but failing. The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Ethan. "Your dad's been trying to reach you for a while," he said. Ethan nodded quickly. "I told you," he said to wait. The officer looked back at the phone, then at the door, then, almost reluctantly, back at the younger officer. "This might be different," he said quietly. Different. That word changed the room. The man with the phone shifted uncomfortably. "Different how?" No one answered him. For the first time since the police arrived, the focus moved. Not completely, but enough. Enough to loosen the grip that had been placed on Jasmine. Enough to make people question what they thought they knew. The younger officer handed the phone back to Ethan. "Can you answer it?" Ethan nodded. His fingers trembled slightly as he pressed the screen. He lifted the phone to his ear. "Dad?" A pause. Then, relief flooded his face. "I'm at the place with the lights. The one you said. I stayed." The room leaned in again. Not with suspicion. With something else now. Curiosity. Maybe even a little fear. Ethan listened, nodding as if the person on the other end could see him. "I didn't go anywhere," he said. "I waited like you told me." Another pause. Then his eyes flicked toward the door. "They took her outside," he added, his voice smaller now. "The lady who helped me." The younger officer stiffened slightly. The taller one's expression darkened, not with anger, but with realization. Ethan listened again, then nodded quickly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He lowered the phone slowly. "He's coming," he said. This time, no one dismissed it. No one laughed. No one whispered. The words settled into the room like something heavy, something certain. Rick swallowed. Who is he?" he asked. Ethan looked at him, then around the diner, then back at the door. "He's my dad," he said simply. It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was the only one that mattered. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but now, there was something else. Faint at first, barely noticeable. A low hum. Engines. More than one. The taller officer glanced toward the window, then toward the younger one. "We might need to rethink this," he said under his breath. The younger officer nodded slowly, because whatever they thought this situation was, it wasn't that anymore. And somewhere just beyond the rain, something powerful was getting closer. At first it was just a sound, low, distant, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. But inside the diner, everyone was listening now. The engines grew louder, not fast, not aggressive, just steady, controlled, like they didn't need to rush. The taller officer stepped closer to the window, squinting through the streaks of rain. The neon reflection blurred his view. Oh, but something in the movement outside made him straighten slightly. "That's not normal traffic," he muttered. The younger officer followed his gaze. Headlights appeared first, then more behind them. Not one car, several. All black, all moving together. Inside the diner, the air shifted again. Not suspicion this time. Something else, something heavier. Rick leaned forward over the counter. "What is that?" No one answered him. The man with the phone slowly lowered his arm. For the first time all night, he stopped recording. Outside, the vehicles pulled up one by one along the curb, engines idling, headlights cutting through the rain like blades of light. Ethan slid off the booth without taking his eyes off the door. "He's here," he said quietly. No one questioned him now. The taller officer turned toward the door instinctively, his posture tightening, not defensive, but alert. The younger officer adjusted his stance. Even Rick stepped back. Because whatever this was, it didn't feel small anymore. The diner door opened, not pushed wide, not slammed, just opened. And with it, the night came in again. Cold air, rain, silence. A man stepped through first. Not hurried, not uncertain, just deliberate. He wore a dark coat, perfectly fitted, untouched by the chaos of the weather. Behind him, 2 more men followed. Same posture, same quiet control. They didn't scan the room like strangers. They looked like they already knew what they would find. Every eye in the diner fixed on them. The couple in the booth stopped breathing for a moment. Rick's hand tightened on the counter. Well, the officers didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched, waiting. The first man paused just inside the doorway. Water dripped from the edge of his coat. He didn't wipe it away, didn't acknowledge it. His eyes moved once across the room, sharp, focused, not searching, identifying. Then, Ethan moved, not fast, not frantic, but certain. "Dad." The word didn't echo, but it didn't need to. It landed, heavy, final. The man's expression changed, not dramatically, not in a way anyone could easily read, but something in his eyes shifted. He stepped forward. Ethan ran to him, small feet hitting the tile floor. Quick, uneven, but sure. The man knelt slightly as Ethan reached him, pulling him into a firm, steady embrace. Not panicked, not desperate, controlled, like he had been holding something back. And now, finally, he didn't have to. "You stayed," the man said quietly. "I waited," Ethan replied. The room didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't speak. Because everything had just changed. The taller officer took a step forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, we're handling a situation involving—" The man didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, not yet. He pulled back slightly, placing his hands on Ethan's shoulders, scanning him carefully. "You're okay?" he asked. Ethan nodded quickly. "She helped me," he said, turning slightly, pointing. All eyes followed, to the empty space where Jasmine had been. But she wasn't there. She was outside. Still in the rain. Still separated. Still misunderstood. The man's gaze shifted, toward the door. A pause. Then, for the first time, he looked at the officers. "Who took her outside?" The question wasn't loud, but it carried something sharper than volume: authority. The taller officer straightened. "Sir, we're just making sure everything is—" "I didn't ask what you were doing," the man said calmly. A silence followed, thicker than before. The younger officer glanced at his partner. Rick stepped back another inch. The man's eyes didn't leave them. "Who?" he repeated. "Took her outside." The taller officer cleared his throat again. "We needed to ask her a few questions." "Then ask them in here." Not a suggestion, not a request, a statement, the kind that didn't expect to be ignored. The room shifted again, but this time, not away from Jasmine, toward her. Even though she wasn't in the room, even though she couldn't hear it. The balance had changed, and everyone felt it, as Ethan held onto his father's hand, his grip tight. "She didn't do anything," he said again. The man nodded once. "I know." He stood slowly, turning fully toward the door. The rain still fell outside, relentless, cold. But now, it wasn't just rain. It was distance, a line that had been drawn and was about to be crossed. Because for the first time that night, someone powerful wasn't asking questions. He was about to start answering them. The door opened again. This time, no one spoke. Not the officers, not Rick, not the man who had been recording everything just minutes ago. The rain poured in through the open frame, cold air sweeping across the diner floor, but no one moved to close it. Because now, everyone was watching. Marcus Whitfield stepped fully inside. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, or didn't demand attention. He didn't have to. The kind of presence he carried didn't need permission. It didn't need volume. It simply existed. His shoes made soft, deliberate sounds against the tile. Behind him, the men in dark suits remained near the entrance, quiet and still, like shadows that only moved when he did. Marcus paused for half a second. His eyes moved once across the room, taking everything in. The overturned tension, the officers, Rick. The phone still held loosely in a trembling hand. Then, he walked forward. Ethan stayed close to him, one hand gripping his father's coat. Safe now, but not relaxed. Because even children can feel when something isn't right. Marcus stopped near the center of the diner. He didn't look at the officers first. He didn't look at Rick. He didn't even look at the crowd. So he looked at the empty booth, the half-eaten sandwich, the cooling soup, the napkin folded neatly beside it. Signs of care left behind. His gaze lingered there for just a moment longer than expected. Then he spoke. "Who helped my son?" The words were calm, measured, but they carried weight. Not the kind that pressed down, the kind that made everything else rise to meet it. No one answered immediately. Because suddenly, this wasn't about suspicion anymore. It wasn't about guessing. It was about being seen and being known. Ethan lifted his hand slightly, pointing toward the door. "She did," he said. Every head turned again, but this time, not toward Jasmine as a suspect, toward her absence. Marcus followed the direction of his son's finger. His expression didn't change. But something sharpened behind his eyes. The taller officer stepped forward, clearing his throat again. "Sir, we were just—" Marcus raised a hand. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough. And the officer stopped, mid-sentence, mid-explanation, mid-control. "I'm aware of what you were doing," Marcus said. His voice stayed level, even. But it carried something else now. Clarity. the kind that doesn't ask for permission to exist. The younger officer shifted slightly, uncertain. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was no space left for interruption. Marcus turned his head slightly, toward the door, toward the rain, toward where Jasmine stood outside. "Bring her in," he said. Not loud, not forceful, but final. The taller officer hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. Marcus didn't wait. He moved, walking past them, toward the door himself, because some people give orders, and some people don't need to. The rain hit harder as he stepped outside. Cold drops against dark fabric. Streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. Jasmine stood just a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, her hair damp from the mist, her eyes steady but tired. She looked up. Saw him. Didn't recognize him. Not yet. But she recognized something else. The shift. The same one she had felt inside. Only now, it was stronger. Marcus stopped in front of her. Not too close. Not distant either. Just enough. For presence. For acknowledgement. "You're the one who helped him," he said. It wasn't a question. Jasmine hesitated. Not because she was unsure, not because she didn't know what this moment meant yet. "Yes," she said quietly. A drop of rain slid down her cheek. Or maybe it wasn't rain. Marcus studied her for a brief second, taking in more than just what was visible. The wet apron, the tired eyes, the steadiness in her voice, the way she didn't step back, didn't shrink, even after everything that had just happened. He nodded once. "Come inside," he said. Simple. Direct. Jasmine glanced toward the officers, then back at him. For the first time that night, someone wasn't questioning her place. They were restoring it. She stepped forward, crossing the line that had been drawn, the same line that had pushed her out just minutes ago. Now, she walked back through it. Not alone. Not uncertain. When they entered the diner again, the air had changed. Completely. All the same people stood in the same places, but nothing felt the same. Because the story they thought they were watching was no longer the story that was happening. Marcus stopped near the booth again, Jasmine beside him, Ethan just behind. And now, everyone was looking at her, not with suspicion, with something else, something closer to realization. Marcus turned slightly, facing the room. The officers. Rick. The man with the phone. "All of you," he said calmly. No one moved. No one spoke. "You had questions." A pause. Then, "I have answers." And in that moment, the balance didn't just shift. It flipped. No one in the diner moved. Not because they were told to stay still, but because something deeper had taken hold. Sure, the kind of stillness that comes when people realize they've already gone too far to take anything back. Marcus stood at the center of it all, calm and grounded, as if the tension in the room didn't belong to him. Jasmine stood beside him, not behind, not off to the side, beside. And that alone changed everything. Ethan held onto his father's hand, his fingers still wrapped tight, but his shoulders were no longer tense. He wasn't scanning the room anymore. He wasn't searching, because now, he had been found. Marcus looked once more at the table. The sandwich, the soup, the napkin. Proof of something simple, something human. Then he turned, facing the room, The officers. Rick. The man who had been recording. All of you, Marcus said, his voice steady, clear, and quiet enough that everyone had to lean in just a little to hear it. You had questions. No one answered. You had concerns, he continued. You saw something you didn't understand, and you decided what it meant. His gaze moved slowly, not accusing, not emotional, just precise. You made decisions, he said. A pause. And you made them quickly. Rick swallowed. The taller officer shifted his stance. The younger one lowered his eyes slightly. Marcus turned his attention to the officers first. You responded to a call, he said. That's your job. The taller officer nodded slightly, relieved, if only for a second. Marcus held that moment, then let it pass. But what you choose to see when you arrive, he added, that's not written in any procedure. The relief disappeared. The words weren't loud, but they landed, firm. The younger officer glanced at Jasmine, then back at Marcus. She was trying to help, he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. Yes, he said. She was. He turned next, to Rick, the man who had called. Rick stood straighter, as if trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. I was just trying to keep things under control, Rick said. I didn't know. No, Marcus interrupted calmly. You didn't. Rick stopped. Because that wasn't a defense. It was a confirmation. Marcus stepped slightly closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present. You didn't know, he repeated, but you still decided. Rick's mouth opened, then closed, because there was nothing left to explain. Marcus turned again, to the man with the phone, still holding it, still unsure whether to lift it or put it away. You recorded it, Marcus said. The man nodded slowly. Just in case. In case of what? The man hesitated, didn't answer. Because now, he didn't know anymore. Marcus let the silence stretch. Then he spoke again. I've already seen it. That got everyone's attention. The man's hand tightened around his phone. The officers looked at each other. Rick blinked. Seen what? Rick asked. Marcus's gaze didn't move. The footage, he said. From outside, from nearby businesses, from the street. A beat. I know exactly when my son got out of the car, he continued. I know how long he walked. I know who passed him, who didn't stop. His voice stayed even, but something underneath it had changed. Not anger, not quite, but something close to disappointment. Marcus shifted his focus, back to Jasmine. And I know who did. The room turned toward her again. But this time, it wasn't suspicion. It was recognition. Jasmine didn't move, didn't react. Because she hadn't done anything for this moment. She had done it for him. Marcus nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. Then he turned back to the room. You all saw a situation, he said. And instead of asking what was happening, you decided who was responsible. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to argue. Marcus took one step back, not away, but enough to include everyone again. The truth is simple, he said. Another pause. She helped my son. The words settled into the room, clear, undeniable. He walked into this place alone, Marcus continued. Cold, hungry, waiting. His eyes moved again, slow, measured. Oh, and the only person who saw him, as a child who needed help, was her. No one looked at Jasmine now. not directly, because to look at her meant to face what they hadn't done. The younger officer shifted his weight again. The taller one exhaled quietly. Rick looked down. Marcus let the silence hold. Then, he spoke one more time. You questioned the wrong person. Not louder, not sharper, but final. The kind of sentence that doesn't invite response. It ends the conversation. The man with the phone slowly lowered his arm completely. Rick stepped back from the counter. The officers stood still, because in that moment, the story they had built in their minds had collapsed, and in its place, something clearer stood. Not complicated, not dramatic, just true. Marcus turned slightly, looking at Jasmine again, but not as a stranger, not as someone who needed explaining, but as someone who had already done enough. And for the first time that night, Jasmine felt it. Not the weight of judgment, not the pressure of eyes. Something else, something quieter, respect. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, the storm had already passed, and now, only the truth remained. But truth, Jasmine had learned, didn't always bring comfort. Sometimes, it just made everything quieter, heavier. The diner no longer felt like a place of judgment, but it didn't feel like a place of relief either. It felt like a room where something had been exposed, and no one quite knew what to do with it. Marcus stood still for a moment longer, letting the silence settle, not forcing anything, not rushing. Then he turned, not to the officers, but not to Rick, to Jasmine. Fully. For the first time. Up close. Not across the room, not through assumptions, but directly. She met his gaze, didn't look away, didn't lower her eyes, even though her hands were still slightly cold from the rain, even though the night had already taken more out of her than she had planned to give. Marcus studied her quietly, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, not like the others had. There was no suspicion there, no doubt, just attention. You stayed with him, he said. Jasmine nodded once. He was alone. Marcus glanced briefly at Ethan, who stood beside him, calmer now, watching them both, then back to Jasmine. No one else did, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Jasmine let out a small breath. No, she said. A pause followed. Not awkward, just still, but Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering something deeper than what had just been said. Why? The word landed gently, but it carried weight. Not the kind that demanded, the kind that invited truth. Jasmine blinked. Not because she didn't understand the question, but because she hadn't expected it. Of everything that had happened, of everything that could have been asked, that wasn't the question she thought would matter. Why did you help him when no one else did? The room leaned in again, not physically, but in that quiet way people do when they sense something important is about to be said. Jasmine didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted slightly, not away from him, but inward, to somewhere older, colder. A bus station bench, a night that smelled like rain and concrete, people walking past, while not stopping, not looking, not asking. She had been small once, too, smaller than Ethan, and invisible, until she wasn't. She swallowed, then looked back at Marcus. Because someone should, she said. That was it. No speech, no explanation, no attempt to make it sound bigger than it was. Just the truth. Simple, unpolished, real. The words settled into the room, And for a moment, no one moved, because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to question. The younger officer shifted his weight again, this time not out of uncertainty, but something closer to reflection. Rick stared at the floor. The man with the phone slowly slipped it into his pocket. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He didn't nod, didn't speak. He just held her gaze. And something in his expression changed. Not dramatically, not visibly enough for everyone to catch, but enough. Enough that Ethan noticed, because he looked up at his father, studying him in the same quiet way. Marcus exhaled slowly, then gave the smallest nod. Not to the room, not to the officers, to Jasmine, as if something had been confirmed, something he hadn't expected to find. "You didn't hesitate," he said. Jasmine shook her head slightly. He needed help. Marcus's eyes moved again, to the table, the half-finished meal, the napkin, the small, quiet evidence of care, then back to her. "Most people," he said, "need a reason." Jasmine didn't respond, because she didn't have one. Not one that could be explained in a way people like him usually understood. Marcus seemed to recognize that, because he didn't ask for more. He didn't try to make her explain it, but instead, he turned, slowly, looking at the room again, at the people who had watched, who had judged, who had decided. Then back to her. "You didn't need one," he said. It wasn't praise. Not exactly. It was something else. Something deeper. Recognition. Jasmine felt it. Not loud, not overwhelming, but steady. Like something settling into place. For the first time that night, she wasn't being seen through someone else's fear. She was being seen for what she had done. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ethan stepped slightly closer to her then, still holding onto his father's coat, but leaning just enough to bridge the space between them. "She said she'd stay," he added softly. Jasmine looked down at him. "Oh, I did," she said. He nodded, satisfied. Marcus watched that exchange, and something in his posture shifted again. Less guarded. More human. He took a slow breath, then spoke. Not to challenge, not to question, but to decide. And whatever he was about to say would not just end this moment, it would change what came after. Marcus stood still for a moment longer. The diner was quiet now, not tense, not afraid. Just waiting. Jasmine could feel it. That shift. The same room, the same people. But something had moved underneath it all. Something irreversible. Marcus looked at Ethan once more, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did exactly what I asked you to do," he said. Ethan nodded, his voice small but steady. "I waited." Marcus gave a faint smile. Then he turned back to Jasmine. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jasmine," she said. "Jasmine," he repeated, as if making sure he wouldn't forget it. A pause followed. Not empty. Considered. Marcus stepped slightly closer, still respectful, still measured. "You paid for his meal," he said. Jasmine blinked. Of all the things he could have noticed, that. She nodded. He was hungry. Marcus glanced briefly at the counter, where the crumpled bills still sat, then back at her. "You stayed when everyone else stepped back." Jasmine didn't respond, because there was nothing to add. Marcus let out a quiet breath. Then, without raising his voice, "I'd like to offer you something." The words landed softly, but they carried something heavy, Not authority, not pressure. Possibility. Rick looked up sharply. The officers shifted. Even the man who had been recording leaned forward slightly, because now the moment had turned again. Jasmine hesitated, not because she didn't understand, but because she did, and she wasn't sure what it meant. "I'm fine," she said gently. "I was just doing my job." Marcus shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "You were doing something most people don't." Jasmine held his gaze. Her voice stayed calm. "I don't need anything." That was the truth. She had learned a long time ago not to expect anything in return. Not for kindness. Not for doing what felt right. Marcus seemed to recognize that, because he didn't push, didn't try to convince her. Instead, he shifted slightly, his tone just as calm as before. "This isn't about what you need," he said. "It's about what should be recognized." The room stilled again. Rick swallowed. The younger officer lowered his eyes. Marcus continued. I own a group of restaurants across the city," he said. "Some small, some not." Jasmine listened, not impressed, not dismissive, just present. "I'm always looking for people who understand something that can't be trained," he added. A pause. "You understand it." Jasmine exhaled slowly. "You don't know me," she said. Marcus nodded. "No," he agreed. "But I know what I saw." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "I'd like to offer you a position," he said. "Management track. Full training. Paid." Rick's head lifted. The word management seemed to echo louder than anything else that had been said all night. Jasmine didn't move, didn't react immediately, because it didn't feel real, not in the way people expect opportunity to feel. It didn't come with excitement. It came with quiet, with weight, but with the feeling that something was shifting beneath her feet. She started, then stopped. Ethan looked up at her. "You should say yes," he said softly. Jasmine glanced down at him. His eyes were clear now. No fear, just belief. Marcus spoke again. "There's more," he said. The room leaned in, not physically, but in that quiet, collective way. "I also fund a scholarship program," he continued, "for people who've had to build things on their own." Jasmine's brow tightened slightly. "I don't go to school," she said. "Not yet," Marcus replied. Another pause, then, "You could." The words landed differently, not like an offer, like a door, one she hadn't even known existed. Jasmine looked away for a moment, not to refuse, but to think, to breathe, because this wasn't about money, it wasn't about status, and it was about being seen, and that was harder to accept. Rick shifted behind the counter. "You're serious?" he asked before he could stop himself. Marcus didn't look at him. "Yes." Rick swallowed again, because now he understood, not just what had happened, but what it meant. Jasmine turned back, her voice softer now. "What about here?" she asked, glancing around the diner, the place that had watched her, judged her, but also the place she had shown up to every day. Marcus followed her gaze, then turned slightly. "Do you work here full-time?" he asked. Jasmine nodded. Marcus looked at Rick, really looked at him, not as a background figure, not as part of the room, but as someone responsible. Rick straightened instinctively. She's one of our best," he said quickly. "Never late." "Oh, never!" Marcus raised his hand again. Rick stopped, mid-sentence. "Thank you," Marcus said. Not dismissive, not cold, just finished. Then, effective immediately, Marcus continued, his voice calm. She won't be working here anymore. The words landed like a quiet thunder. Rick blinked. What? Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't explain. You said you wanted to protect this place, he said. Rick nodded slowly, unsure. Marcus held his gaze. Now you can. Rick didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Jasmine stood still. The room around her felt distant now, muted, like everything had pulled back to make space for something new, something uncertain, but real. Marcus turned back to her. This isn't about taking you away from anything, he said, a pause. Oh, it's about making sure you're not left behind. Jasmine felt something shift in her chest. Not sudden, not overwhelming, but deep. Like something she had been carrying quietly for years had just been acknowledged. Not fixed, not erased. Just seen. She looked at him, then at Ethan, then at the empty booth, the sandwich, the soup, the small moment that had started everything, and she realized nothing about this had been planned, nothing had been expected, but everything had led here. She took a slow breath. I'll think about it, she said. Marcus nodded once. That's all I ask. And for the first time that night, there was no pressure, no expectation, just possibility, and the quiet understanding that sometimes one small act of kindness doesn't just change a moment, it changes everything that comes after. Thus the next morning came quietly. No sirens, no flashing lights, no black SUVs, just the soft hum of early traffic, tires rolling over wet pavement, and the distant rumble of a city waking up after rain. Chicago looked different in the morning. Cleaner, almost softer, as if the night had taken something heavy with it. Inside the diner, the lights were already on. Warm, yellow, familiar. Jasmine stood behind the counter, tying her apron the same way she always did. No one would have guessed what had happened the night before. Not from the way she moved. Not from the way she greeted the first customer who walked in. Morning, she said gently, setting down a cup of coffee. Her voice was steady. The same. Because some things don't change overnight. But something had changed. Not around her. Inside her. Rick wasn't there. The space behind the counter felt different without him. Quieter, less tense. A handwritten note sat near the register. Temporary management. New ownership pending review. Jasmine had seen it when she walked in. She hadn't asked questions. Not yet. Because she already knew the answer. The door opened again. A cold breeze slipped in, carrying the scent of damp concrete and fresh morning air. Another customer stepped in. An older woman this time. Slow. Careful. Looking around like she wasn't sure she belonged there. Jasmine noticed it immediately. Because she always did. Take your time, Jasmine said with a soft smile. Sit wherever you're comfortable. The woman nodded, relieved. Moved to a booth near the window. The same booth. Jasmine paused for just a second, her eyes resting on it. No, the memory still there. Clear. Not fading. Then she picked up a menu and walked over. The same way she had the night before. The same way she always had. Because that part of her didn't need to change. Outside, the sky had cleared, light breaking through the clouds, the city moving forward, as it always does. But not far from there, A black car sat parked across the street, engine off, windows tinted. Still. Inside, Marcus Whitfield sat quietly, watching. Not in control, not directing anything, just observing. Ethan sat beside him, looking through the glass. "That's her," he said, even though he didn't need to. Marcus nodded. "I know." Ethan watched as Jasmine leaned slightly toward the older woman, listening, nodding, offering something small and kind, something that didn't show up on any receipt. "Oh, she's doing it again," Ethan said. Marcus followed his son's gaze. "Yes," he said. Ethan frowned slightly. "She didn't change," he said. Marcus looked at him, then back at Jasmine. A faint smile touched his face. "No," he said quietly. "She didn't." A pause. Then, "That's why she matters." Ethan thought about that, watched her a little longer, then nodded. Inside the diner, Jasmine returned to the counter, placing the order ticket down. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. She hesitated, pulled it out. A message. Simple. No pressure. No urgency. Just a name. Marcus Whitfield. And one line beneath it. "The opportunity is yours, whenever you're ready." Jasmine looked at it. Read it once, then again. Her fingers rested on the screen. But she didn't reply, not yet. Well, because for the first time, she didn't feel like she was behind. She didn't feel like she had to catch up. She felt seen. And that was enough. For now. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, picked up a tray, and turned toward the next table. Another customer. Another moment. Another chance to be exactly who she had always been. Outside, Marcus watched for a few seconds longer, then started the engine. The car pulled away slowly. No announcement, no final scene, just movement. Forward. Inside the diner, the light stayed on, warm, steady, unchanged. And Jasmine. She stayed exactly where she was meant to be. Not because she hadn't been offered more, but because she understood something deeper. Kindness doesn't ask who you are. It shows who you are. And sometimes, that's what changes everything. Thus, if this story touched you, leave a comment below. You don't have to write anything big. Just type 1 if you believe kindness still matters, or 0 if you've ever felt overlooked like Jasmine. Sometimes, even the smallest comment says more than words. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real, emotional, and unforgettable, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next story might stay with you even longer.